Join the Widewail team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewail.com/data to sign up or find it in the revised community. That's widewail.com/data.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Optimized, a marketing performance podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Janet Rosseth, 25-year veteran of multifamily marketing, and our format's a little different today. We are getting the privilege of interviewing one of our founding sponsors, Widewail, and I have Jake Hughes and Katie Ritter joining me today. You want to introduce yourselves? Jake, you go first.
Thanks for having us. Nice to meet you. I'm Jake Hughes, Director of Marketing at Widewail.
Thanks, Janet. And I'm Katie Ritter. I'm our multifamily team lead here at Widewail and work with all departments at Widewail and as it relates to our multifamily clients. So excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited. I get to record episode 3 of 3 episodes. You've already had a nice conversation with Ronald Harrington on Rooms with Ronald and with Suzanne and Paul on Decoding Multifamily. Mm-hmm. So this is actually a 3-part series uncoding all of the information that you have pulled out of Widewail from Resident Testament, correct? And you're actually recording episodes on the revised platform as well. So if people can't get enough of the data here, they can still find more of it. So if you would just take us through a little bit of a recap of the first 2 sessions, because our focus today is going to be really on the renewal experience. But take us through your first and second episode and what those topics were and what was captured in those episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can take the first one with Ronald. It was great. That was our first podcast talking about this data, and Ronald was awesome. He was like our hype man leading us into the series. So we generally talked about our data collection, the method of collecting the data, why it's important, a little bit about Widewail and what we do. And we do online reputation, but a big part of what we believe in is getting the voice of the resident and operationalizing that. So talked a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing and got into some specific topic benchmarks for what drives generally a positive experience. We didn't quite get into the different stages, which is what we'll talk about today, but just gave a quick preview of some of the topics that drive positive reviews generally and what are some topics that show up in negative reviews, and talked a little bit about people and AI and how that all works together. So that was a fun episode.
I'll tell you, I listened to it twice.
Oh, amazing.
I didn't know that I was going to get to interview you on episode 3 until after I had listened to it once. So then I was like, well, I have to go back and listen again. But yeah, you covered a little bit also in just the tour and prospect experience, which is kind of the first part of the journey with our brands. And I love how you said operationalize the experience, because that is exactly what we're trying to do, is consume all of the sentiment of residents and find a way to optimize, if you will, the experience that we deliver out of our teams and our systems for a really good living experience on our properties. Jake, how about episode 2 with Suzanne and Paul? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, we had a great time with Suzanne and Paul. It's my first episode joining of the 3. I was out of town for episode 1, unfortunately. We went through the benchmarks for topics in episode 2. So how we think about our data is we analyzed 400,000 reviews, put them through our AI and topic analysis, and are able to pull out consistent topics that are mentioned within these reviews. We have 49 topics that we've tracked throughout our study. And on episode 2, we really dug into what were the major drivers, positive and negative sentiment. So on the positive side, the onsite teams are leading the way. In my experience analyzing this type of data, I haven't seen such a dramatic positive impact from any one topic, and especially on-site teams or the people that you have on staff are by far the most significant driver of positive reviews we see across the industry.
That's really exciting. I feel like on-site teams need to have a moment here after surviving 2020 and going virtual on everything and automations on everything. It is really exciting for me to hear that it, at the end of the day, actually does make a really big difference to have human beings involved in your rental journey.
100%.
Absolutely. I think
Well, we're going to really nerd out here a little bit, if you don't mind, for the hour, because the fact that you have, let me just repeat it, 400,000 captured households, people?
I guess it would be people, yeah. 400,000 residents from the last 12 months. So
From
it's a
just
fairly...
12 months. That's incredible.
It's roughly Q2 2023 to Q1 2024.
Okay.
So it's a up-to-date data set. It's what residents care about within the last 12 months.
I'm super curious how you even consumed that much information to pull these sessions together so quickly, but I feel like that's a whole nother episode.
Jake's been fantastic doing it. It is a lot of data to understand and wrap your head around, and every time we have these conversations, I feel like something new comes up, and it's been really, really fun to see the different ways to use it. So I'm definitely excited.
Good, exciting. I'm excited for all the revised episodes too, because you're also bringing screen shares into it, right? Podcast is just us, our voices. I mean, people can see us on screen if they want, but we're not showing graphs and charts, which I'm sure you have. Very cool information.
So how we're structuring it is we're taking major trends, key takeaways, and then we're breaking it up into 3 pieces just to make it more easily consumable by life cycle stage. So we did tour and move-in last week. That recording's online now. Residency is coming up on the 29th, and then we'll finish it up with the retention on June 6th.
And that's what we're going to cover today, which I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the most important reason for retention, which is expense driven. It costs so much more to lose a resident than to keep a resident. And I think when we look at 2-3 years ago, it was actually optimal to lose a resident and gain a resident, because there were, every renter that left your property, there were 20 more lined up who wanted to pay substantially more for that apartment. But today, that concept has changed drastically. When you lose a renter, you're not only experiencing the high cost of turning the unit, which we know can be upwards of $3,000, but you're also potentially losing vacancy loss, which could be a month or 2 in these conditions with all the supply coming into the markets. And you're also taking the risk of applicant fraud, which I just read a stat from RealPage. Allowing a fraudulent applicant into the property can cost owners $5,000 to $15,000 in the eviction process to get them back out. So then you're right back at turning the unit again, all the expenses of marketing it, vacancy loss. So this is a really important conversation on listening into what residents are telling us is the most important factor in their decision to renew and stay with us. So I'm excited to dig into this. You guys too?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So tell us what you're learning from residents in terms of all the 49 data points that you collected. I know we get marketers and owners get so excited about the newest amenities and the fanciest differentiators that we can market about our property. But at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like those are the reasons people are renewing.
It's definitely been interesting to see that jump in. We talked about it a little bit in the tour stage, but certainly, like you mentioned, amenities attract. You need You want to have the coolest and slickest amenities to set yourself apart. However, we see this significant jump in mentions of amenities in negative reviews around renewal. And this could be for a variety of reasons. And a couple of our thoughts around that are just when amenities don't meet expectations, when you expect maybe the pool is going to be open, or you expect the fitness center to not be full or machines be working, things like that. If that's not met, then you're going to see this increase in negativity around renewals. It's just, this wasn't what I was expecting. I can't use it. It's hard to schedule, whatever it is. So we've talked about this idea of, okay, well, what are people using and what are people talking about and mentioning in positive reviews? And can that be incorporated into thinking about amenities as a more sustainable piece of the resident experience, and not just focused on the next shiny new thing, but what do people want and what do people want to stay? And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but we've just found that the negative mentions of amenities 80% above the average benchmark in retention and renewal reviews is just, that was high, and that was surprising to us for sure.
It's obviously a frustration when it's not meeting the expectations, but if those amenities are talked about in a positive way, I'm just curious, like, how often does that happen? I got to say, I read a lot of apartment reviews. For consulting clients, we deliver the Stride Prospect Experience Report, where we really evaluate the start to finish experience of a prospect in the digital leasing format and then the human handoff. And Google Business is one of the points that we always evaluate. And I can't say that I've read a whole lot of reviews where people actually say, hey, if it wasn't for that treadmill in the fitness center, I wouldn't be still living here. I've never seen it.
Never seen it, never used it. Thought it was a good idea when I moved in.
But you're absolutely correct that every time I go down to run on the treadmill, somebody's using it and they never put a second treadmill in. That is more common to see. The negative side of it.
So a little context for how we put this all together, just to frame the conversation here. How we look at topics is we use our technology to show up to determine how often a topic is mentioned in a review. And then we're able to take that mention and calculate it as a percentage of total reviews. So on-site staff, on average for the whole data set of 400,000 reviews, is mentioned 68% of positive reviews and 20% of negative reviews. So that's sort of like our baseline for the study. And then we're able to chunk it up by life cycle stage. So we can look at a subset of the entire data set filtered by life cycle stage, in this case renewal, and see how that compares. And then we can put a percentage number on the difference between those two numbers and see how much more impact the topic A has versus topic B.
So when it comes specifically to the renewal portion of the life cycle, are you capturing that feedback from residents after they've signed another renewal or during the renewal process?
It could be either. It's anytime a review has been left that has some sort of keyword or mention that's related to renewal. And that's how we identify it and then filter it into a subset.
And I want to back up for a second, because did you just say 68% of those sentiments were positive versus how many negative? What was the percentage on negative?
Yeah, so for the benchmark is what we call it, the average mentions for on-site teams across the board for the whole data set, 68% of positive reviews mention on-site staff. The number two topic, guess how often the number two topic is mentioned? 14%.
Oh, wow. That's really incredible.
Almost 5x.
So how often, though, do we hear that owners and operators are really gun shy of allowing residents too much opportunity to submit reviews because they're sure those, 2% of the squeakiest wheel, the most negative residents are going to be the ones that voice all their feelings. But from my experience, when I've had clients roll out a reputation management software, it feels like there's a flood of positive interactions that weren't ever really given a chance or an easy way to submit that feedback. So we were reliant on the ones that were the angriest and the most motivated to come out and post those couple of reviews.
Exactly. You nailed it with the 2% of people, because I think that is
we live
a
in
reality.
fear of them.
They live in fear of them, and it's just probably not as many people as you think. And we are total agreement that a proactive approach and making it really easy after these different life cycle stages to leave a review is going to lead to more volume, better reviews in general, and just create a more accurate picture of what it's like to live at the community, because you're asking everybody, and it's allowing an opportunity for those happy people to leave that feedback.
And
100%.
how incredibly rewarding for the on-site staff to read that too.
Totally. And validate all of the work that they're doing, and
Yes.
how it's hard. Like, we talk about this, we're comparing it sometimes to other industries in terms of getting reviews, and it's so hard. It's not just a one-off in and out, and you go buy a car and you leave and you're pumped up. It's 365 days, and there's many things that can happen in that time frame. So I think it's hard work, and I think to be celebrated is really important.
I agree. And I think we talk a lot in this industry about the importance of a really solid move-in experience, because residents really make their decision on whether or not they're going to renew their lease in the first 2 weeks that they move in. If it's a not great experience and they're second guessing their decision in that first 2 weeks, they've already set the tune for, I'm probably not going to renew. So something pretty remarkable has to happen in the rest of their residency in order to change that frame of mind. Mm-hmm. And if we're not actively asking along the path of their experience when they've had an experience with maintenance, which really they're the ones that have the most interaction with our residents, or with the responsiveness out of the office, or with the experience of some of the activities and neighbors that they meet, then we're not really giving them an opportunity to change that frame set by the time we get to renewal.
Yeah. And
let's talk about the other data points that you uncovered, because when you sent me the material and I started looking through it, I was shocked at some of the data.
Yeah, which one stood out to you most?
Oh, the neighbors and noise.
Neighbors and noise.
Mm-hmm. Can we jump right there?
We can jump to that.
Katie, we were talking to somebody last week about that.
Yeah, we mentioned noise, and it was a marketer, and they were like, I mean, this is the data I need to just tell our developers to deaden the walls. Like, that's it. Like, just deaden the walls. The neighbor, they just want to have a quiet place to live. That, that's what people want, is a safe, quiet place to live. They don't want to hear the conversations next door. Right. So the noise piece was interesting in that you think, yeah, okay, the location you're in probably contributes to some noise outside, but then just the noise in general of being able to hear folks and the person next to you, some investment there and having some data behind it. Like, hey, this is a key piece to people renewing or not. And
absolutely
the are coming through the roof. Yeah.
I want to hear the numbers on this one, because again, I think this is an area where when people are having a really great experience and the property is really quiet and they're not noticing noise, they're not as likely to talk about it in a review. But when they're experiencing it all day long, they can hear the neighbor next door tap their toothbrush on the sink. Like, that's got to just set the tone all day for, now I'm going to hear every noise in this building. How did the numbers shake out on these percentages? Jake, can you share that?
Yeah, so when we look at noise for negative reviews within the renewal stage, it's mentioned in 11% of negative reviews, which again, for context, maintenance is number one at 41%, and the vast majority of topics are mentioned 15% or less. So 11% is substantial. Compare that to noise on the positive side, only comes up in 2.15% of positive reviews. So we also see a jump if there isn't a lot of noise. I don't know why a lot of noise would be a good thing. So I'm just going to assume the positive reviews reference it being quiet. That does also jump 30%, but on the negative side, we see a more substantial jump because of bigger numbers. There being a 30% jump between renewal versus the benchmark in terms of noise. So I don't think we can say necessarily that people aren't renewing because of noise, but it is these are very specific numbers that can prove there is a substantial impact on the likelihood of a resident to renew when noise is a problem.
And I
And
think
what about neighbors? Go ahead, Katie.
that's just what I was, yeah, that was perfect. Neighbors. The positive thing is element of neighbors is they're mentioned 104% more often in positive negative renewals than the benchmark than they're generally mentioned. So it seems as though it's if people like their neighbors, they're feeling a part of the community. This is something that maybe they didn't expect, right? From moving in, and it's been a fantastic experience and maybe above expectations, and they're more willing to talk about it. So we do see that significant increase in positive renewals and great neighbors and driving that positivity.
That's always a goal in operations and management of apartment communities, is trying to build a community where people really do feel like they're part of a neighborhood. And especially even more so now that we're attracting a lot of empty nesters back into renting who have perhaps lived on the same cul-de-sac for 15, 20 years where they raised their children with the neighbors, right? So the importance of the connectivity and introducing neighbors to neighbors, I imagine this is a really important piece of apartment living for some of the folks who have weighed in on this, because when you know your neighbors and you like your neighbors, you're probably a whole lot more tolerant of their noise.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
For community, we see in positive reviews, it's the 9th most important topic mentioned in 10% of positive reviews, 28% over the benchmark.
Community and sense of what does community, how do you define community versus
It's
neighbors?
any string of words or kind of series of ideas and concepts that are related to the idea of community. It's a long list. Absolutely.
It's just interesting that it all still seems to come back to point to human beings.
Yep.
People are talking very positively about their experience with making relationships with neighbors and also their relationships with the on-site teams.
Yeah, these are soft sciences, if you will, but the way that we can categorize and quantify this, we can put a specific number on what the impact is of events, what the impact is of community, what the impact is of noise and neighbors. All these things do make a material impact. And I think what the novelty of this data that we've been getting a good response from it is because operators intuitively understand a lot of these points. I don't think we're necessarily blowing anyone's minds.
No, but validating it with an actual number is really helpful in budgeting for the things that impact these data points.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can also track this information over time. So if you know that 10% negative mentions for parking is your benchmark, then and you implement a new parking technology or a new process, or you expand your parking into more space available, you can see that should trend in a certain direction over time,
right?
And you can track the progress
there. You should see an
there.
ROI trend on it and have it actually measurable.
Exactly.
The other thing,
how did parking play out?
It was up there. Let's see what the numbers
You
are.
had location and parking on there. Can you explain what was location just as it was used as a word in any sort of copy, so we don't know whether that applies to where my apartment was located in the building or the location of my building in relation to retail, restaurant, grocery? Am I accurate there?
I could find that out by reviewing some of the reviews within that category and getting a better sense. The way I originally interpreted it as what part of the city you're in, What if it's near a park, if it feels good, general beauty, aesthetics, convenience to restaurants, transportation, stuff like that.
Which isn't always totally controllable by the on-site team that is managing the renter experience. Your building is where it is. But if it's a topic that seems like maybe it's coming up in reviews over and over again, it might be worthwhile to help guide residents to the things in the area that seem more walkable or closer than they originally thought, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like this is all about experience. And as a marketer, you can't help but take the things that are spoken about positively or negatively and try to leverage your marketing in a way that bridges that experience for your renters.
Yeah. And from the marketing perspective and why we focus on public reviews is because you have your survey data, you have internal surveys, but no resident or prospect typically sees those. So these are topics and things that are being discussed that are influencing everybody, and having this ability to, someone's reading through this, making a quick decision. We're living in a world where trust and social proof is so critical. So being able to measure what is influencing people and what people are talking about, and taking a step into, okay, what if I'm a prospect or a current resident trying to decide to renew? This is what I'm reading. This is what people think about my community right now. Is this accurate or is this not? And so that's part of why the public piece of this is so important as well, as this is what's influencing those folks.
We call it the brand mosaic.
I like that.
Network public feedback surrounding your brand. That's it always exists around you. And you, as a marketer, it's your job to shape it. You can't control it. You can't write it for people. But you can
learn from it,
influence it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And learn from it. Exactly.
Absolutely. I think there's nothing more important than actually hearing from your customers what the brand experience is. I mean, same thing with restaurants. You can look online, look at the pictures they post of the food they serve, look at the menu and the location of the restaurant. But at the end of the day, we all open Yelp and read the reviews before we decide what we're going to order or if we're going to actually go there.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Exactly.
Yeah. Talk to me more about price, because I think that came up, especially on renewal. Price increase or just price in general. How did that play out? What did you interpret there, Jake?
I almost brought this up before. It's sort of the elephant in the room, because it's very impactful. It is unsurprisingly very impactful. Rent comes up in 25% of negative renewal reviews, 156% above the benchmark, and price increases come up in 14% of reviews, 190% above the benchmark. And these are the top two drivers of negativity in renewal. So
I was
not that big of a surprise.
I'll say raised in this industry, but I was always trained that price is only an issue in the absence of value. So if you take that, the numbers that you just said, and how often price and rent increase came up in negative reviews, does that imply that the rest of the value of the experience of living at the property, or the neighborhood, the on-site teams, the amenities, and parking situation, they were not having a decent enough experience to feel like the price increase was warranted? Is that fair to say?
I think that's accurate. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Is there anything that you gained off of all of this insight to imply that those who had the strongest feelings about their price increase were also properties that were kind of fighting to build reputation as it was? So if you're starting with a 3.0 or below on reputation and price increase is brought up over and over again, is it a different experience than a property with a 4-star and above? and a price increase.
Join the Widewail team May 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern for part 2 of our 3-part virtual event series, Voice of the Resident. For part 2, we will look specifically at residency. Using AI topic analysis, we've analyzed the free text of 400,000 Google reviews from residents of hundreds of top multifamily groups, including the NMHC Top 50, to identify how often 50 key topics are mentioned by residents. By filtering for and analyzing the topics by life cycle stage, we can isolate which topics are more influential during residency, versus tour, or renewal. Go to widewail.com/data to sign up or find it in the revised community. That's widewail.com/data. This is an
Putting you on the
interesting
spot a
question.
little.
I have a few thoughts here.
Go ahead, Jake. You can go first.
More than likely, that 3.0 community isn't getting very many reviews. So there's this complete lack of engagement. And so we've seen this over and over again. If you don't ask for reviews, then the unhappy people show up and complain about price increases. And that skews all your data and doesn't really provide you with a ton of insight. That community that has a 4.5, decent amount of volume, likely has a more diverse set of numbers because they have a wider constituency involved here.
To echo that, so this is an example. We had a group that was worried about turning on asking for renewal reviews because of this exact scenario of, well, price, rent increase, prices are going up. We don't want to get that negative feedback. And before they turned it on, the general ratings around renewal was a 2.2. Like, this was just off the street, people mentioning renewal and price increases. When they turned it on, the next month, the average rating was a 4.4.
Wow.
So I think I was thinking the same thing as Jake of this might be mentioned. It might feel like it's being mentioned a lot, but I do think it comes from being proactive and activating the voice of other residents and getting other opinions in there, because you may find that, yes, rent is going to go up. And if you can communicate that value and express that value throughout the lease and communicate those rent expectations, I think people get a little bit jarred when they're surprised. And so I think that has something to do with it as well. But in general, there were other things, and there's positivity around renewal that doesn't always have to mention that price increase. So that was just a little anecdote around being proactive and the impact it can have.
It
And
seems
this
like
database,
people the opportunity to weigh in and share their feedback on their living experience so far. If they've been able to share their feelings on, the tour and the move-in experience and a couple of maintenance requests and, general feedback on how their responsiveness is with the site staff, then by the time they get asked that question on renewal, if they've said nice things all along, it's a whole lot harder to all of a sudden be frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And remember, this data set is just the last year. So whatever the sentiment in the market about price is reflective of broader trends that are going on in this short period of time. So we're going to look at this again next year. Depending on how the market evolves, it'll change a little bit and likely reflect that. Excuse me.
Right. Gosh, it would have been interesting to have seen it in 2019, 2020, and 2021, but
I know.
The renewal experience was very different then. So I want to talk a little bit about just the impact of this information on keeping our residents renewing and teeing them up for a good renewal experience. But Katie, you've shared a couple of examples of how owners and operators are utilizing this information and making decisions off of it. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. So I do think that what this can bring to light is what we've talked about is what is important. And so another example of how folks are using this data, we had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and it was a group that works with developers, and they were saying that they had a huge fitness center, no one was really using it, and then they had like 3 common spaces that weren't being used, and just nothing was really being activated. And they wanted to expand the fitness center into some of that common area space, and they actually instead used it for work from home pods. They had a lot of people who were just working from home and needed some space. So I think noise can contribute to that. If you're starting to see a lot of mentions of noise and just disruption, that all of that can feed into maybe, okay, we've listened, we're going to put this in, give you an opportunity to take a meeting
Quiet
in
spaces.
peace, quiet spaces.
Ah.
So that's an example of how to use this. And it could be, if you're taking over a property and you want to, you're redeveloping, or however the the different companies are using it. But I think when we talk about amenities too, it's important to say, okay, well, why is this building with maybe a couple less amenities thriving in terms of resident experience? What are they talking about? Are there positive mentions of noise and renewal? And can we apply that to this new building we're building? Do we have to go all out on amenities? Can we just create a nice, quiet, safe place to live? And how do we do that? So I think there's learning moments in a lot of different ways. And those were just a couple things that came up. I loved the work from home pods, but taking some of this and being like, okay, this is what my current residents are saying. And then I think the second piece of this too is it's important to keep asking, because people move out and things can change. And I think it's important to keep that volume up too. And again, like Jake mentioned, also measuring, where are we investing? I'm kind of rambling now at this point, but the last point I'll make is, I think we establish what we think residents like. We put it in, we build it, and then we ask them about it. This data is listening first, understanding what their preferences are, and then maybe applying there. So it's just thinking about it in a different way, and directionally we're spinning around and looking at it through the residents'
Right.
eyes.
We all think the hottest new trend is going to be what drives people to the door and makes them stay long, but at the end of the day, it all comes back to clean and somewhat safe. We can't promise safe, but clean,
Yep.
safe, and good human beings managing the property that are responsive, maintenance especially. I want to shift to that and just ask, we've talked a lot about just the impact of the human beings on the property, both neighbors and on-site staff being a high percentage of those reviews that are captured in a positive light. Seems to me that training departments and marketing teams have a real opportunity here to lean into that in terms of training our on-site teams, what gets captured in reviews and what is the most important driver of renewals. And also, there's probably an opportunity to train neighbors too, right?
Yeah, I think
we do
this
have
data,
influence in how neighbors live in multifamily together.
You would know more about that than us, Janet. You can tell us.
Yeah.
I think when you're thinking about people being so influential, and the industry has been abuzz with trying to figure out what AI means for the industry this year. And I think we're coming out with something that's somewhat of a counterpoint to the common narrative of you need AI to take over everything and streamline, cut. Let's make this work. How you utilize your on-site teams and the technology surrounding them, like they need to be the center of it all and coddled and taken care of. And this infrastructure built around them takes away unnecessary distractions and responsibilities from them. so that they can do what they do best, which is drive positive outcomes face-to-face, in person, on site, and be very responsive. So our 2 cents is not that AI technology, any sort of a new technology is bad, but it needs to service the on-site team so that they can do their job as well as possible.
Absolutely. There was a really good statement that came out of the AIM conference last week. Just the sentiment of AI and how much it's being deployed and how much we're trying to centralize administrative functions. But at the end of the day, the human beings are still so important in the on-site management experience because AI can't smile. It can't hold the door open for you. It can't address your need when you have fear or joy. That's where human beings come in. So using AI to free up the ability for those human beings to be more interactive and engaged with residents is having a definite moment here, as stated by the residents that you have that you have captured.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to create a positive reputation, create that brand mosaic that's going to present your communities well to the market, that starts, I'm not going to say it ends with, but it starts with your staff on site and how they're interacting with your residents. And then there are a number of nuances underneath it. We haven't touched on communication yet. Communication comes up quite frequently in negative reviews. I think there's two pieces to any interaction. There's the material issue, and then there's how the situation was communicated. And you can kind of get away with a lot if it's well communicated, would be our interpretation of what we're reading.
Right. Well, it's all transparency. Are you really getting away with it if you're just being transparent and calling it out as it is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that comes up, we see that with maintenance is we see these increase in negative mentions of maintenance in general. And what that's referring to is just this is broken or this is fixed or I haven't heard anything, and communication is mentioned in conjunction with that often. But maintenance staff is a big driver of positivity. They're rarely mentioned in negative reviews or people's names. And it's an interesting phenomenon of people can talk generally about the sink being broken, but they're not going to call me out for the sink being broken. They're not going to call Katie out. But the system that in which it's hard to put a work order in, or I haven't heard anything and no one's come by, that's general maintenance. But if I'm there, I show up, I don't have the part, but I'm communicating that and I'm working really hard to do it, all of a sudden, Katie has made this maintenance experience not that bad and has communicated, and there's a face behind that. And to your point, AI can't fix a sink. So those people and those interactions are really important, and we see that in that nuance right there.
In positive reviews, we see on-site staff, location is number 2, maintenance staff is number 3. And you can't really change location. So it's basically staff and then a subset of staff is driving most of the positivity.
Staff and staff.
Staff.
Exactly. The takeaway.
Yeah. And that becomes a differentiator right there when you've got prospects that are looking at reviews and making a decision on whether or not to keep your property in their shortlist. The experience that residents are having with the staff really plays into it because you're signing a 12-month lease. And hopefully our residents are re-signing another 12-month lease. And the reason they're not choosing to fight to go and own a home somewhere is that someone else is taking care of their living experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of fear about negative reviews in the industry, but when you're in that situation where a prospect is reviewing what is being said about your community online, the negative reviews are also valuable because the way in which you interact with and engage with that unhappy resident reflects on your community and is interpreted as a good or bad thing by the prospect. So I want to prop up the industry and give it the credit that it's due. The average response rate within the industry to reviews is 89%.
That's fantastic.
Which is awesome. It's very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good.
I think, so what we see is that so many reviews are getting responded to, and it's the community's opportunity to contribute to the narrative, tell their side of the story, support the unhappy resident, solve a problem. We see individuals update their review after the fact very often. They'll edit,
That's so great to
say,
hear.
update, this person reached out to me, solved the problem, 5 stars. And they always go to 5 stars
Fantastic.
after it's fixed. So
That's such a
there
good
is
number. I'm so glad you said that.
room to turn a bad situation into something that's useful for propping up your brand in the community.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. I think that's, when I recommend reputation management to clients, it seems like the 2 reasons not to do it and not to turn on some sort of a platform that allows for higher volume and more opportunities to submit feedback. It's 2 reasons. One is the fear we talked about, the fear that that 2% of your loudest negative residents are going to be the ones who go out there first. And they are clearly the ones that go out there first.
They're already out there.
Yeah, they're there.
Exactly.
They're there already.
And the other one is concern that there's not going to be enough bandwidth to respond to the reviews. But to hear that 89% are being responded to, clearly we do have the bandwidth to do that.
Well, you've just outlined the Widewail value prop for us very clear. So thank you for that.
We've done that quite nicely, better than Jake and I ever could, probably. There you go.
Good. What else? We have just a couple of minutes left, but what else do you really want to get across in this episode on renewals and just your findings in general? What do you want to make sure that people have heard in this 3-part series?
Can I do my hot take?
Yes,
Katie?
please.
Jake. Yep.
Mic drop.
Okay. So when we look at multifamily, the whole industry has a clear volume problem. The amount of reviews that it generates is just not good enough, frankly. The average community generates 1.59 reviews a month on Google. For context, another industry that we work with frequently is automotive. And the benchmark there is 10 reviews a month, with many, many hundreds of dealerships generating 100, 200, 300 reviews a month. So multifamily will never be automotive, but I think there is sort of a happy medium, and we can encourage and inspire multifamily to go find more opportunity.
That?
So there's
Obviously,
2 opportunities.
A solution like yours, but even with a solution like yours, how do we increase that and make sure that residents feel so compelled to share more feedback?
So independent of Widewail or any technology, it doesn't really matter. There are 2 key ways to do this. One is the low-hanging fruit that everyone's going to do in the next year. And if you don't do, you're going to be falling behind. And 2 is the more speculative, harder approach that those who get it right will win long term. So the low-hanging fruit is taking advantage of tours. Tours are extremely high volume. They are the highest rated life cycle stage that we've studied. So the average rating is a 4.1 out of 5 stars. We used Google's 1 to 5 star rating. And that's higher than any other life cycle stage that we've reviewed.
That's amazing.
Only 5.85% of reviews in our study reference tour. So there is so much opportunity to take advantage of tour. We work with a client, BH Management, that introduced tour, and they increased the review opportunities by 60% just by adding tour.
What percent was that?
60. So
60.
It was like tens of thousands of opportunities that they would have just passed up if they didn't take advantage of this.
On the tour thing, I do think that it is an experience that you're providing. Even if they're not a resident, you spend time and money getting them in the door, and their experience with your staff is a key part of a predictor for potentially their experience in the next 12 months. And so people, I do think reading about that and writing about that, and it's certainly an interaction that is worth asking after.
I like that.
And then I think the groups that can figure out maintenance are going to be the true winners from a reputation standpoint. I think everyone should figure out tour, and that will become a baseline expectation just to be competitive. And if you don't do that right, you'll be behind. Those that really win will figure out maintenance, because next to tour, it's one of the highest volume interactions that residents have with your group and your communities. You need to find opportunities for more reviewable events, and maintenance is a prime opportunity. That said, it's an uphill battle. It's tough because the average rating on maintenance is 2.89. It's the leading cause of negativity. Keeping in mind that negative reviews within our study include all of those organic reviews that are from the unhappy residents, and a lot of those are related to maintenance. So I think there's more opportunity there than the current data suggests. But if you can really figure out maintenance, request a lot of reviews, generate reviews, drive that section of your reputation up, it may still be lower than your tour performance, but you're matched up against every other community in the market that has even worse performance on maintenance.
It feels
so I think
like
there's a real opportunity to be
when your residents are thrilled with their maintenance team and love those team members. They speak so highly of it, but the frustration that can happen when they don't feel connected to those folks can fall apart quick.
It's a huge deal. We see it in move-in, we see it in renewal, and it's like there's some serious competitive advantage opportunity there. So I'm curious to see how that goes.
Opportunity to say, hey, our mentions of maintenance wait time is rated a 4.5 throughout our portfolio, or mentions of our maintenance staff are mentioned 45% higher than the industry benchmark, and using that as marketers, so understanding what people care about and being able to say that and use that as we take care of our people. Because I own a home, and I'm like, oh, I wish this stuff could be taken care of by not me.
You spend your entire week working in this industry and then have to call someone in and pay them $100 just to walk through the door and tell me what's wrong before they even fix it. Yeah.
Like, I would just love, I do miss the living in apartment days where that's a big part of it. So I do think there's an opportunity to really capitalize that and set yourself apart. Mm-hmm.
I agree. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but I'm excited to see this episode in Revise when you're able to share even more information and on screen. But we're out of time, so let's give listeners access to where they can find previous sessions. So your episode 1 was with Rooms with Ronald Harrington here on the Multifamily Media Network. And then you did episode 2 with Decoding Multifamily with Paul and Suzanne, also available on the Multifamily Media Network. And then this is episode 3, but then do you want to give listeners the dates of when you are running your Revise sessions as well?
Absolutely. So like Jana mentioned, we're doing a 3-part series. Part 1 was on tour and move-in, and that's complete. You can find that by going to widewail.com/data, and you'll be able to navigate to the right page that has that recording. Katie and I are not able to change the screenshot that it randomly picked, and it's very unflattering.
That is unfortunate.
I apologize, Katie.
AI has not figured out that piece yet. Creating a flattering screen grab. It's okay.
Hate that.
Part 2 will be on May 29th at the end of the month.
Okay.
And you can also sign up for that through widewail.com/data. Part 2 and 3. The registration links are in there. They're on Revise as well. So if you're a member of the revised community, you can find it, get to the same spot. And then the last one about the topics that we covered today in more detail will be June 6th.
Awesome. I'm excited for all three of them. And just really enjoying how you're rolling out this information in bits and pieces, because honestly, the first time I listened to the first episode with Ronald, I felt like I was almost overwhelmed by some really important data, and being able to digest it and come back and listen to part 2 is fantastic. And honestly, from an operator standpoint and marketer standpoint, you are completing all of these sessions just before a lot of companies start their budgeting process. So great information to be able to leverage for budgeting and really identifying what's most important to our end consumers. And also, if you aren't currently using any sort of a reputation management platform, really great data to be able to point to the need for higher volume of reviews.
Absolutely.
Thank you so
Thanks so
much,
much for having
Jake
us.
and Katie, for being here and letting me ask all these questions and dig into this data and nerd out with you for an hour. I just want to close the session. Thanks everybody for listening and taking time. Please go back and listen to Ronald's first episode and Suzanne and Paul's second episode with Widewail. And as a reminder, you can find all of this good content, podcasts, blogs, all of it on the Multifamily Media Network, brought to you by sponsors like Widewail. Thanks again, Jake and Katie. It's a great session.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.